I'm Jason. We're going to talk about paragraph shading and borders in InDesign. What is paragraph shading and paragraph borders? A long time ago, we had the ability in InDesign to select a paragraph and put a basic rule under that paragraph. And going into my paragraph formatting in my control bar, I could go to the very end of the control bar and use the drop-down menu and go in and put what was called a paragraph rule. And a paragraph rule was just simply something that we could put in before or after the paragraph return, just a simple rule to underline or emphasize that particular paragraph. And the paragraph rules were pretty simple. You had your choice of a rule above the paragraph return or a rule below. Typically, we'd put a rule below. We would have to turn that on and then click the preview button to see that we would then get a rule below that paragraph return. We could control the weight and the color of that line, as well as the type of the line here in the paragraph rules. We could control if the type runs the entire width of the column or the width of the text. But we could also go and we could offset it to bump it down a little bit more from the baseline. And we could bring it in from the left and right side, or we could do a negative number to push it out from the left or the right side. And this was all simply part of the paragraph formatting controls. Now, if we were doing this manually without doing this in a paragraph style, this is how we'd go through and do it. Now, they have since improved this by using the paragraph border and shading, but this could be something that could still work for you if you would like to put this into a paragraph style where you want a rule after a paragraph return. If we did want a rule after a paragraph return, and you've set up your paragraph styling here, I'm going to apply this so that I get my paragraph styling. I've already set up my paragraph and character styles, of which I've done in previous videos. Now I'd like to add this rule after. So in my paragraph styles, I'm going to right-click or double-click on that paragraph style and choose Edit. Here we have our paragraph rules, and you see, just like I showed you before, we could have a rule above or below, and we can turn the rule on and apply the color and the width and how it's going to work here. Now this is pretty basic, and it usually comes after or below your paragraph return or above your paragraph return. But I want to show you a more advanced setup here that is going to be called our shading and our border. Now our shading and our border are available here in our paragraph formatting controls. We have our shading and our border right here. You can also go to the very end of your control bar, next to your Shazam and under your gear to the cheese grater, and call up your paragraph borders and shading here. Or in your properties panel, you'll see your paragraph formatting. Click on the three dots, bring up the rest of your paragraph formatting, and there is our shading and our border settings here. Now, what is the shading and the border settings? Well, let's take a look. What the shading and the border is this is part of the paragraph formatting controls. So just like that rule below, when you hit your paragraph return, you will get this shading or this border. But up here, I'm going to turn on my shading, click that button, and you can see what it does is it just puts the shade behind the entire paragraph, because this is paragraph formatting. Now, if you'd like to get into this deeper, one of the cool things that you can do is go up to this paragraph shading, and by the way, these little squares here and the drop-down menu here allow you to change the colors and also edit what's going on. And if you Option or Alt click this little icon here, this is going to call up the entire paragraph shading and borders dialog box. So, with the preview button checked on here in the lower left-hand corner of this dialog box, you can choose from your list of colors that you have created in your swatches panel, the tint at which that color is going to appear, and you can also control the corners of this box. Now keep in mind that normally what we would do in the past is actually create a separate container behind here, place it behind the text, and then when the text moves, the border didn't move with it. Bad idea. But here I can actually go in and I can create the shading behind this entire paragraph so that it actually looks like a box. Now before we start working with the corners here, I'd like to talk about the offsets here. Right now the offsets are set to 0, which means the box is going to actually come right to the edges of the column and to the top and bottom of the text. If the text is taller, it's going to be taller. Here, if I increase the margins or the offsets here, you'll see that that box gets much larger all the way around. I can also go in and make a much smaller box using a negative number, which will allow me to go beyond or inside those settings. If I would like to set, say, the top and the bottom more than the left and right, just simply unlink, and this would allow me to have taller offsets here than the left and the right. I can also control how wide this bar is, just the width of the text or the entire width of the column. Now let's take a look and see how that looks. So there's my blue bar, or my shading, behind my menu. I'm going to zoom in here so we can see. Now this blue bar is part of the paragraph formatting, which means if I move my entire text container, that blue bar is going to move with it. Now obviously this is a problem because it's running into the text below. And here's an exact reason why I would probably go in and do some space after. No, I would not hit my return key multiple times, because if I do, this is paragraph formatting, which means all of the formatting that I apply to the paragraph previous, when I hit that paragraph return, I'm going to get this same formatting repeated. And since this blue bar was here in the previous paragraph, and I hit my paragraph return, this simply repeats. So I don't want to do that. This is why I select my paragraph, go into my paragraph formatting, and specifically say, I want this amount of space after my paragraph return. Let's go back into the shading. I'm going to Option or Alt click back on the shading icon to bring up the dialog box. Now remember, you can always go to the very end here of your control bar and use the drop-down menu to call up your paragraph shading as well. Now you can control the intensity of that shading, make sure your preview is turned on, and you can choose any color that you like and the tint that you want from here and apply that color. If you would like your shading to go beyond the edge of your container, you can set your left and your right to a positive number, which will go beyond the edges. A negative number will pull it in from the edges. Okay? So a positive number in the top and the bottom will make it taller than your text. A negative number will make it shorter than your text. You can also control where the top and the bottom edge fall based on your ascenders and your descenders of your text. If you'd like to control the borders here, you can control the corners, just like you can with any other container in InDesign. You have your standard corners, or fancy, bevel, inset, inverse rounded, and rounded corners. Now keep in mind that these are all adjustable as well. So you can adjust the size of these larger and smaller to get different rounded corners, fancy beveled corners, and you can also control each corner separately by unlinking this chain in the middle and setting each one separately. So if you'd like to set up something like this, you can very easily not only set the color and the tint, the corner style and the shape, as well as the offsets and how the type will go and fall within your bar. I'm going to click OK. Now here, obviously this is probably going to look a little bit better if I go into my paragraph formatting controls and center this. This could work very well. But I notice that the type isn't completely centered here. It looks like my bar is a little bit low. So I'm going to Option or Alt click back on the shading in my control bar, and I'm going to set the offsets here a little bit more just to get that bar a little bit taller. And we'll see how that looks. And this is kind of a fine adjustment just to make this so that the bar looks like it's symmetrical. Now this is something that you'll have to do with different typefaces simply because different typefaces have different heights and therefore the offsets are going to be different for every font. Now remember, this is paragraph formatting, so once I click OK, if I were to hit my return key again, I would get this formatting reapplied. So part of the formatting, just like going in and creating paragraph styles, this is what you could do. Now I've already created this header style. It's in here, but clearly I've gone in and I have since added the paragraph shading. So to add this paragraph shading to my existing paragraph style, I'm going to right click on that style that I've already created and applied, and I'd like to redefine the style to include the changes that I've made here for this shading behind. So I'm going to redefine that style. Now up here, I had gone in and I had also applied this as a header style, and you can see that that applies as well. So paragraph shading is quite nice because it all moves around with the container and it's easily adjustable right here in the paragraph styling. If you wanted to set this up in the paragraph styling after you've made your style or while you're making your style, in your paragraph styles, your paragraph border and shading is going to be right here. So the shading here, obviously, the style is the header, which is what we created beforehand. The shading, it's the green, and all these settings that we just created is something that we can apply directly to our paragraph style. Now another thing that we also comes up here is going to be our border, and our border is quite interesting too. Now here's something interesting. As I go through and I apply my settings, I'm going to apply a little bit more space after my heading. Then I'm going to right click on my header, redefine that style so it captures it. What I'd like to do is I'd like to go and I'd like to put some lines after each one of my body copy paragraphs. Here I have created a paragraph style that is called my body copy. And in that body copy, every time I hit return, it's going to give me a little bit of space after, and it's going to format the copy just like this. But what I'd like to do between these items is I'd like to put a line between here just to nicely separate. Now I could go in and I could draw a line separately on each and every element. Problem with that is that when I move my container, that it doesn't move my bars with it, and it's a constant battle with trying to get the spacing correct. So in my paragraph styling here, I can go to my border. So I'm going to click on my border, and it applies a border to this entire paragraph. And I'm going to Option or Alt click on that paragraph or that border icon here to open up my format here. And here's my border. By the way, the border and the shading are the same dialog box. You can see you can switch between the border and shading tabs and actually turn them both on if you'd like. You can have one or the other or both. Here we're going to talk about the border. Now, borders kind of create an outline around here. Unlike the shading that creates a filled box, the borders will create a box. But keep in mind that you don't have to have a border on all four sides of the box. In fact, I could unlink these and I could turn off the top, and I could also turn off the sides of my border and only have the bottom border showing here. And I could control the style of that border as well, and I could control the color from my swatches menu here, and I could also control the tint, and I could control the size as well. And going down here to my offsets, just like we were dealing with the shading behind here, I'm going to unlink this too because I'd like to offset this a little bit more from the bottom to move that down to make that look like it's about in the middle, in between that paragraph. Now the offsets here are going to be the offset from the top of my type. This is going to be from the bottom of my type, and I'm actually moving it down because it's a positive number, but I could also offset it left and right. Now these offsets are if I was going to go ahead and put a border around the top, bottom, and left-hand sides. Keep in mind that I'm only putting the border on the bottom of this individual container, because I could actually go in here and I could put it on all four sides of the container like this, and you can see that I now have that border all around. Then if I went in and I did the top, you see that the top will move, the sides will also move as well. But I don't want a border on those sides, which is why I leave those strokes set at 0, so I only get the stroke on the bottom. Now you'll notice that the left and right here can run longer or shorter than my column width. A negative number is going to keep it within the column. A positive number is going to run it past the column. So this could be kind of nice to be able to apply a border here with a much shorter line in between and a much smaller line going to come down here and say I'm at 1 point and a dotted line right here. Now I could also change these corner styles too, and because this is just the bottom that I'm working with, I could actually round those corners a little bit, which in this case isn't going to show anything whatsoever, simply because I don't have all of my sides together. Okay, so if I do this right here, it's not going to show anything, simply because what am I rounding? Well, I'm not rounding the entire box, I'm just rounding a line. But if I did have a border around everything, I could go and I could round those borders as well. So keep in mind, shading is basically the fill, and border is going to be like a container or a box around it. I can also control the width of the text or the width of the column. Here I have it running the width of the column, but I specifically shortened it up here from the left and the right hand sides so that it comes in right here. I'm going to click OK and see how that looks. Now if I like what I've done here, I've already captured my body copy style, and I can go and right click on that body copy, redefine the style so that, let me select that again. I'm going to select my body copy, and I'd like to include this border, just the underline here, with my entire body copy style. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to redefine my style. Now once I have that border set, I'd like to go in and I would like to add this to or redefine my paragraph style. When I choose the redefine style, it seems like it disappears. And the reason why is if I edit my body copy here and I go into my paragraph border, what I want to do is I want to unmerge this or uncheck this merge consecutive borders and shading with the same settings. And what this does is this unchecks, or by unchecking this, you treat each paragraph as its own basic paragraph so that it doesn't just apply it at the very end, it applies it to each and every paragraph. So that's a key thing to make sure that you do. Once I click OK, my paragraphs all have this border underneath. Now if I'd like to edit this right directly within my paragraph style, again, you can right click on the paragraph style, edit the border, change any of the attributes that you'd like to in here, the size, the style of the line, the format, whatever it may be, and you can see that it will then go in and it will apply this style of line to everything that you do. Now because this is all paragraph formatting, every time you hit your paragraph return, you will be able to get this paragraph formatting after every return. Now another unique way of doing this is to put things kind of in brackets. So here's a completely different way to look at it. I'm going to right click and I'm going to edit my body copy. Here I'm going to go to my paragraph border and I'm going to turn off my bottom paragraph lines, which means after every paragraph return, that would be underneath. I'm going to turn that off. And I'm going to apply the lines to the left and to the right here. And I'm going to set the left and the right offsets to 0, which means they're going to be at the very edges right here. The top and the bottoms I'm going to set to 0 because I don't want to move them up or down. And here, what this does is you can see it puts borders on the left and the right in the weight of 3 points, and they stay right there at the very edges. Now if I do a positive number that will move those out, kind of off to the edge here, I'm going to keep those at 0, and I'm going to put them right at the edges. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into my, basically my indents here, and I'm going to indent the left side of my body copy and the right side of my body copy here. And what this does is this indents it on both sides here, 1/8 of an inch on both sides. And with my paragraph border, this 3-point border on the left and the right, that is right there at the left and the right edge of my column, no plus or minus values, which means it's right there at the edge, will now allow me to create a very nice kind of a bracket look to control this paragraph. So I'm going to change the color here, and I'm actually going to make this black at, say, 60% to make it kind of gray so you can see. Now what this does is it creates kind of a nice bracket situation. And every time you hit a paragraph return, you get those brackets. So this could be another way that you could go in and form your content here. So we can go and we can put lines or borders on the top and or the bottom. Because if I decided to go in and put this on the top and the bottom, I could control the lines top and bottom here, doing 1 point. Probably doing a little bit of offset to get those a little bit further away here so that they will not be touching the type. And then it just simply creates a border top and bottom within my content right there. And if I want, say, 1/2 point of line weight on the top and the bottom, it will be a 1/16 of an inch from the top and the bottom here every time I hit my paragraph return. Now I could also control my indents here. Right now they're set to 1/8 of an inch, but this creates a nice way to kind of create separate sections here using my paragraph border options. If I did want to put a box around everything, I could simply enter in a weight or a value around the stroke. And if I have this set to be rounded corners, then I could round those corners or make those very narrow corners here to get what looks like rounded boxes, which could be cool. Now, if I decided that I would like to shade those boxes as well, I could also apply a shading in here. Again, if I want those rounded corners, I'd have to round those corners, making sure that the shading has the same rounded corners. And then I also go and I do the offset the same as my lines. Here, got to reduce down the size of the corner. So here, not only do I have a border around all of these, but I also have a shade as well. So that could be something interesting too. Keep in mind that I can do one or both. If I turn off the shading goes away. If I go into the border and I turn off the border goes away. I don't need to have both. I could have one or the other, but I could also go in here and I could also do just the right and the left sides to create lines, or I could do just the top and the bottom to create lines like that, and then control my indents and spacing here if I would like to bump my copy in from the sides like this so that I could have more content in here. I'm going to turn off my hyphenation. And you can see that I can create a very interesting style in which these lines could come together. Now this is all a paragraph style, so if I were to go in, any place that I put in a paragraph return, it's simply going to format exactly like I asked it to. So this could be quite interesting. So that's a very simple overview of paragraph shading and paragraph borders, how you can use them separately or in conjunction with each other.